La joya azul.
Chapter 7. Part 3. In the afternoon, Arian and Vanus had a private audience with His Majesty. The king offered to be at his service for as long as they saw fit. Arian declined the monarch's offer. He had personal matters to settle and the Kendali did the same. His fate was linked to Arian's. This was a huge disappointment for Her Majesty, but incredibly she accepted it willingly. The gates of the kingdom of Demember would always be open to them. Now Arian had to convince the mercenaries to accept his company on the journey to Tripulia and knew who to talk to, Kush the magician. She found him in the afternoon in the king's library looking for new knowledge. Arian found him leafing through the annals of the kingdom of Demember. As usual, by his side he had his book, with the last pages were blank where Kush was taking notes with a golden pen. Wizards never get tired of studying and reading. Kush raised his head and smiled slightly as was customary for him. The history of Demember is very interesting to understand the growth of Olbiana. I have some gaps about it and this library allows me to fix them. Is it of any use? Kush stopped writing and looked at the young woman closely, evidently in the library talking for some reason. If it's of any use. I'm going to be honest with you, it's more personal interest in the story of mercenaries than anything else. A word of advice, learning new things never hurts. It was good advice. Arian sat down in front of the wizard and looked at all the books he had open. The young woman tried to look at something but Arian knew how to read the basics. It was difficult for him, but also all the books were written in a language he did not understand. Also next to the books there were a lot of scrolls that looked like they were authentic relics. Arian, I doubt you've come to consult ancient scrolls from the history of Demember. I need help. The magician raised his head again. Kush, like the rest of the mercenaries, wondered what the hell was this girl doing here. Vanus's story was very clear. Gosberg and Agnorak had informed him. There was not much information about Arian except that he helped them at Tame with the king of Demember and that he came from the northern free lands on the continent of Tergir. The magician knew little of that continent. From what was said there were some very interesting ruins, the Towers of Oblivion, and also located in the north was the mysterious kingdom of Bursary. Another interesting fact is that throughout Tergir there were remains of the constructions of the First Era. Someday he would like to visit them because the First Age was a subject that obsessed Kush. What do you need? Allow me to accompany you on your journey to Tripulia. Kush was silent. Tripulia was not a city for a young woman. The city of magic was spectacular with its great towers that were lost in the clouds. Something so spectacular that the city seemed like a dream come true, but it was only a mirage since away from the clouds in the streets it was a corrupt and sordid place, full of intrigues and conspiracies between the different orders of wizards, students and vendors who had any ingredient, potion or contraption necessary for their spells and rituals. The magician did not like Tripulia. In fact, he was only twice obliged. Being a magician who was not attached to any order of magic, he had to register in the register of the Great Council and then pass a kind of exam, where they made sure that he was not a necromancer. Death magic was absolutely forbidden, although it was rumored that many grandmasters practiced it in secret. Tripulia was a place full of hypocrisy. Kush had not answered Arian's request. The young woman was impatient with Kush's silence, so she wanted to give an additional reason to convince the magician. My brother is studying there and I want to go visit him. The magician thought that Arian was sincere, although she did not tell the whole truth. But he could not decide whether or not to accept the request. The one who commanded the expedition was Aris. Surely he would not hinder the journey. Getting to Tripulia from Demember was easy. Since the truce after the Iron Wars it was not a conflict zone. I don't think there will be any problems, but I have to ask Aris. If you come, the most likely thing is that the Kendali will also accompany us. Arian was overjoyed and nodded, hugged the wizard, and retreated to his quarters. After dinner Arian and Vanus returned to their rooms and found Gosberg lying quietly on Arian's bed. The Denkga did not seem to have any respect for his privacy. What are you doing here? Arian asked, somewhat annoyed. Because you have refused His Majesty's offer. It's a pity, your highness held you in high regard. Gosberg, as usual, maintained his carefree tone and played with one of the light stones given by the king. How do you know that? Normally on the walls of castles they are full of curious ears, and in this royal palace they are the size of a mountain ogre. Arian smiled for a moment and sat down in the corner of the bed. It's true, we've turned down the offer since I have to travel south. Destination Tripulia. Arian looked askance at Gosberg. She hadn't commented on her intention to go to that city with anyone or about her brother's existence. Kush has told Aris and me about your request. We have agreed to have you join us in Tripulia. Once there we will separate, we have a mission to fulfill. Arian was so happy that he hugged Gosberg tightly, and the Denka, surprised by so much effusiveness, dropped the stone of light. After regaining his composure, Gosberg got up to leave the room. We leave in 2 days, so get ready for the trip. So saying, Gosberg disappeared humming down the hall. Arian was left alone with the Kendeli. The young woman smiled satisfied now she was sure she would go to Tripulia. She didn't really care what the mercenaries thought of her. In a few days he would meet his brother and warn him of the great danger he was in because of that blue jewel. The king gave the young women all the material they needed to make the journey. Almost all of the mercenaries would ride except for those who would travel in a wagon, which would be the orcs, the dwarf, and Vanus. Arian would ride the mule even though he didn't know and would have to learn during the march. Luckily Kiona was a very docile and intelligent mule, he just needed to talk. Agnorok was also forced to ride a horse. He didn't like it at all, but there was no room in the wagon, so he had to obey Aris' order. While a small garrison of mercenaries remained in Demember as the monarch's personal protection, the bulk of them would leave in 2 days for the east to embark for Almera. The expedition to Tripulia consisted of a Kush man, 2 half-orcs, Aris and Agnorok, 3 orcs who were cousins of Aris and who were never separated from Aris by order of their father. Their names were Ulak, Gulak and Mulak. Arian seemed to him to be the same. A dwarf Kritus and 2 Denkis, one of them was Gosberg and the other was the only member of the expedition who walked. He just couldn't fit in the wagon. He was a giant, huge. A snow troll would think twice before attacking him. His name was Sabu. The Denka was over 3 meters. He was a short-haired, silver-grey and muscular hulk. His gaze was serious and he was always clinging to his double-edged axe, and unlike his father he was very untalkative. The group was completed by Arian and Vanus.